While dedicated pirate decks have yet to see any actual competitive play, select pirate cards have found their homes in various formats. So in today's video, we're looking at some of the best pirates throughout all of Magic's history. And at number 10, we have Pitiless Plunderer. This 1/4 pirate costs 3 and 1 black. Its ability creates a treasure token whenever a creature you control dies. Treasure tokens are artifacts that can be tapped and sacrificed to add 1 mana of any color. Plunderer's ability allows you to build up a sizable amount of treasure tokens quite fast when combined with a repeatable way to sacrifice and destroy your own creatures. Similar effects to this exist in cards like Pawn of Ulamog. However, they specifically only work with non-token creatures. The fact that Pitiless Plunderer works with creature tokens as well as actual creature cards opens up even more lines for use, specifically in the realm of infinite combos. The most efficient ones with Plunderer is Chatterfang Squirrel General, whose effect is to make a squirrel token in addition to any other tokens whenever its controller would create a token. This means for each treasure token the Plunderer creates, a squirrel is created along with it. Then Chatterfang's other ability allows you to pay 1 black mana and sacrifice as many squirrels as you want, thus creating even more mana and squirrel tokens, allowing the player to generate infinite mana. If the player also has a card such as Blood Artist, the squirrel's dying would eventually kill your opponent via life drain. This is a 2-card combo, however it is one that has primarily seen success in the Commander format, and Plunderer has seen no top results in any sanctioned tournament event. Beyond this, the card is also not as seen as competitive one in Commander, leaving its power more in line with more casual play, but still above every other pirate not ahead of it on this list. And at number 9, we have Siren Stormtamer. This card is a 1 blue mana creature with 1 power and toughness. It has flying, which means only the creatures with flying or another keyword reach are able to block it. It also has the ability to pay 1 blue mana and sacrifice it to counter a spell that targets you or a permanent you control. This card's most frequent use is as a piece in protection and mitigation in blue aggro decks. These decks aim to cast spells primarily on your opponent's turn and leverage card advantage thanks to the cards like Curiosity, which lets the user draw a card whenever a creature is enchanting deals damage to a player. These aggressive tempo-oriented decks aim to protect the early game creatures throughout the mid game and will often need to counter multiple spells in the mid or late game to assure their threats survive. As such, these decks need to both draw extra cards, but also have these cards be as cost effective as possible. Siren Stormtamer serves as both a potential flying attacker as well as a way to stop any spell that targets whichever creature has the Curiosity effect attached to it for just 1 mana if need be. Beyond that, even just having Siren Stormtamer on board will often force your opponent to target it with whatever interaction they have in hand, just to remove your option of countering their spell. From there, they'll have to find another piece of interaction to deal with your actual threat. Currently, this deck serves as an off option in the historic format, and similar decks to it exist in older formats. However, those formats tend to have better options for interaction, and thus Siren Stormtamer is relegated to Historic and Pioneer, and by extension, the 9th spot on this list. And at number 8, we have Wily Goblin. This pirate costs 2 red mana for a 1 power and toughness creature that creates a treasure token when it enters the battlefield. While Pitiless Plunderer earlier on this list can often produce far more treasure than Wily Goblin, it is Wily Goblin that has seen actual success in tournament play. This is thanks to Goblin decks, specifically those in the historic format, wanting both cheap goblins to cast and mana acceleration. Wily Goblin works on both of these fronts thanks to its treasure production potentially allowing its controller to cast Muxus Goblin Grandee a turn earlier, or even sooner with the help of Scar Prospector sacrificing the Wily Goblin for another red mana. These historic Goblin decks use Muxus as their primary win condition, both swarming the board with the goblins he summons from the top of the deck as well as his impressive power and toughness boosts in combat. And since his deck is so focused on finding and casting Muxus as frequently as possible, a card like Wily Goblin proves to be a valuable resource. Other pirates with similar abilities, however, aren't nearly as playable. Sailor of Means costs 1 more mana for the same effect and is completely unplayable in any competitive format. It is specifically because Wily Goblin is a goblin, and that they're only a 2-mana creature on top of that it's able to see any form of competitive play at all. And even though its goblin creature type is far more relevant, it's still a pirate and by extension deserves a spot on this list. And at number 7, we have Hostage Taker. This card costs 2 generic mana, 1 blue and 1 black for a 2 power, 3 toughness human pirate. As this card was originally printed, whenever it entered the battlefield, you could exile a target artifact or creature until Hostage Taker left the battlefield. You were also allowed to pay mana of any color equal to the artifact or creature's mana value to cast the exiled card. Thanks to how this was worded, Hostage Taker was actually allowed to target itself with its own ability. If Hostage Taker was the only creature on board, it would then be forced to target itself, leaping to a loop of it exiling itself, then return itself, forcing a draw between both players as this continued infinitely. Wizards of the Coast quickly eroded the card to need to target another creature, and while it could no longer force a draw, this card remained a powerful option in Standard at the time. In current day, it sees play in Pioneer and Control mid-range decks, as well as a top-end threat for that format's version of human aggro. Hostage Taker represents a sizable swing in tempo, especially if the opponent is unable to kill your Hostage Taker before you cast the creature or the artifact that you stole. If you do cast the card you stole, it's a 3-for-1 in terms of card advantage. However, if the opponent is able to remove your Hostage Taker, tempo may swing right back in their favor as they regain the threat you've taken away. This card is also especially tricky in mirror matches, where a hostage taker could take another copy of hostage taker from the other player, starting a back and forth chain reaction of creatures leaving and re-enter the battlefield. Generally speaking though, for older formats with far more powerful options, it's generally better to rely on an actual removal instead of giving your opponent a chance to get the threat back at all. However, a hostage taker is still a potent card, and would have been an outright game-breaking one if it had not received an errata. And at number 6, we have Kitesail Freebooter. This human pirate costs 1 generic and 1 black mana with 1 power, 2 toughness, and the aforementioned keyword flying. Much like one of the previous entries, Kitesail Freebooter's success in competitive play comes from a deck focused on its other creature type, human. This 2-mana human pirate lets you look at your opponent's hand and pick 1 non-land, non-creature card from their hand and exile until Kitesail Freebooter leaves the battlefield. Similar effects have existed before in scene play, such as Tide Hollow Scholar. While unable to grab any creatures, Kitesail Freebooter's main target is generally going to be an opponent's removal and interaction, and thus not being able to exile a creature is only a downside in certain matchups. This is because Freebooter sees play in the aggressive human aggro decks in Legacy and Modern. This deck attempts to make a large board of humans, using threats like Thalia's Lieutenant to close out the game. Freebooter offers protection from kill spells as well as giving the player information on what your opponent's hand includes. Then, based on the information, the human player is able to adjust their own strategy, being more aggressive against combo decks or perhaps being more careful against control decks. Of course, Freebooter isn't perfect. When it dies, it gives back to your opponent the spell that was exiled, meaning that once Freebooter dies, it can often lead to a chain reaction of creatures dying. Instead, the human deck simply hopes to kill its opponent before that concern becomes relevant. While not a reason to run the card by itself, Freebooter does also have flying, which allows it to attack over larger creatures on the board and keep pressuring for damage. And in these human decks, synergies and boosts provided by other humans can turn Freebooter into a more potent threat. All around, Freebooter is a strong protection option for an aggressive human deck, but lacks much utility to splash into other strategies beyond that. And at number 5, we have Angrath's Marauders. Marauders cost 5 generic and 2 red mana for a 4 power and toughness that doubles the damage any source you control would deal to a player or permanent. Doubling the amount of damage something can do is a potent effect, yet one that mostly sees play in smaller, easier to cast forms. The most common example is a card like Temur Battle Rage, which gives one creature the ability to hit twice the turn via Double Strike. While not the same as Double Strike, Marauders has a similar role of suddenly adding a lot more damage than was thought possible on the board previously. Of course, it's hard to surprise anyone with a 7-mana creature, which is why Marauders was fairly unplayable for years after its initial printing. However, when the set Ikoira Lair Behemoth's release, so did a card that finally gave Marauders a competitive home. That card is Winota Joiner of Forces, which has the ability that triggers whenever a non-human creature you control attacks. You then get to look at the top 6 cards of your library and select one human creature among them, then that creature is put into the battlefield tapped and attacking and has indestructible until the end of the turn. Winota decks in the Pioneer format aim to play low-cost creatures like Llanowar Elves, which they can then attack with and hopefully land a big, game-ending human like Angrath's Marauders. This once unplayable pirate now has a home as one of the primary win conditions of the deck. Every creature will deal double damage as attack phase thanks to Marauders now providing its effect to the board, meaning not only do your small, non-humans have a better chance of destroying whatever creature blocks them, but your indestructible humans will either deal a lot of damage to your opponent's face, or remove some of the blockers without much worry. And at number 4, we have Spectral Sailor. This 1-mana blue pirate spirit has both flying and flash, meaning it can be played on your opponent's turn, and allows you to pay 3 generic and 1 blue mana to draw a card. Like many of the cards so far on this list, Spectral Sailor is unassuming at first glance. However, in practice, Spectral Sailor proves to be a powerful piece in multiple decks. As mentioned with Siren Stormtamer, blue tempo-oriented decks value small, evasive creatures and spells that can be cast on your opponent's turn. Spectral Sailor provides not only this, but also a repeatable way to draw cards in the mid to late game. Once a game has gone on long enough, it's not unlikely for both players to be empty-handed and forced to play with only the top card of their deck, racing to be the first person to find more action. Spectral Sailor lets you turn all that unused mana into further digging to break parity in these board stall scenarios. But unlike Siren Stormtamer, Spectral Sailor sees play in other decks as well. What's put Spectral Sailor so high on this list is that it currently sees play within the Pioneer Spirits deck. Spirits in Pioneer are an aggressive deck that aim to swarm the field with small spirits. Spectral Sailor provides a great deal of value as perhaps the best spirit creature of the format that costs 1 mana. Even without using its repeatable card draw, just merely having another efficient body to attack with or use with Shacklegeist provides the pressure and tempo this deck needs to succeed. While Spectral Sailor is certainly a more competitively viable card than the preceding entries on this list, the next 3 entries all had a much larger impact on their respective formats and metas, and thus Spectral Sailor remains only 4th on this list. And at number 3, there's Dockside Extortionist. This goblin pirate costs 1 generic and 1 red mana. It enters the battlefield and creates a treasure token for each artifact and enchantment your opponent controls. This effect in tournament magic is generally not ideal, considering there's no guarantee that your opponent will be on a deck with many or any of the required card types. This card in specific finds its home in Competitive Commander, a free-for-all 4-person format. Decks in that format rely on low-cost mana-reducing effects like Soul Ring and Wild Growth to break parity and pull ahead of the other 3 players. Dockside works both to counter this by disincentivizing people from playing too many artifacts and enchantments, but also in turn provides even greater mana acceleration to the player who can cast it. It's not uncommon for a Dockside Extortionist to come down and make 5 or more treasures. In fact, Dockside is so potent that it wound up becoming a combo piece in of itself with cards like Cloudstone Curio. Dockside Extortionist has quickly become one of Red's strongest cards in the format to a point where many actively call for its banning in that format. However, despite its potency in the most competitive tables of Commander, no sanctioned tournament for any other format has seen Dockside Extortionist in a proper list. However, in the format it was designed for, Dockside Extortionist is far and away the strongest pirate. The next 2 spots into the hand have both seen vast success in the Commander format as well as in sanctioned tournament legal formats. And at number 2, there's Hullbreacher. This 3-power, 2-toughness merfolk pirate costs 2 generic and 1 blue mana. Hullbreacher's effect states that whenever your opponent would draw a card, other than the first card they drew for turn, you make a treasure token instead. This means that if your opponent had a creature that drew them a card during combat, they wouldn't get to draw anything, and instead you'd make a treasure token. Hullbreacher also has flash, meaning you can use it to essentially counteract any draw spell they might have played, leaving them only to play any potential downsides while you reap the upsides. By itself, the effect is powerful, with similar cards to it such as Notion Thief having been playable in the years before Hullbreacher's printing. But what makes Hullbreacher especially powerful is its synergy with a certain card commonly known as Wheels. Named after Wheel of Fortune, Wheels are cards that force both players to discard or shuffle away their hand, then draw a new hand in its place. Instead of your opponent getting to draw those cards, you instead make a handful of treasure tokens for each card they should have drawn, as they're forced to discard their entire hand. This works against multiple opponents as well, meaning in Commander, a Hullbreacher plus a card like Time Twister would essentially leave only one player with a handful of cards, and a bunch of treasures to cast them. This is what eventually got Hullbreacher banned in the Commander format. However, despite this, it still sees wide play in the Vintage format. Given that Vintage has access to both an abundance of fast mana and every single will ever printed legal, it has become common for blue decks in the format to run Hullbreacher, specifically both Grixis control decks and Underworld Breachstorm decks. And finally, at number 1, we have Ragavan Nimble Pilferer. Ragavan costs 1 red mana with an alternate dash cost of 1 and 1 red. Dash allows you to cast the creature with haste and allow it to attack the first turn you play it, but in exchange for returning Ragavan to your hand at the end of the turn. Whenever Ragavan deals combat damage to a player, it both creates a treasure token for the player and exiles the top card of your opponent's library. And until the end of the turn, Ragavan's controller may cast that spell. Notably, the actual mana cost still has to be paid, but thanks to the treasure production Ragavan provides, oftentimes the actual color of the spell won't affect one's ability to cast it. Thanks to the dash mechanic and the fact that Ragavan's normal mana value is just 1, means that Ragavan will often be attacking as early as turn 2. And unless the opponent also found a creature, Ragavan will connect and begin to provide advantage to its controller. This was most relevant initially in the Legacy format, where Ragavan slotted into existing red-blue Delver of Secret decks as another potent 1-drop creature. Ragavan's theft was often all the more potent in Legacy as well, given the format's general reliance on low mana value spells such as Brainstorm. Ragavan was most potent in mirror matches, where your opponent's deck was full of mostly 1-mana spells that a single treasure could cast. And beyond getting lucky with Ragavan's top deck hits, having treasures for mana production was incredibly valuable in Legacy, given Wasteland was a staple that punished decks like Delver. Now, Delver could potentially live with having multiple lands destroyed by Wasteland, as long as Ragavan could connect and provide more treasure. This eventually led to Ragavan being banned in Legacy. But in Vintage, where Ragavan has even more relevant cards to steal, he has remained one of the most polarizing and relevant creatures in a format where creatures are generally at their weakest. Ragavan's only real weakness is being unable to keep up the fast tempo he sets up, and being unable to turn the corner, which decks built around this pirate are often well equipped to avoid. Ragavan at the time of his banning was one of the most widely played cards in what is one of Magic's most powerful formats, and as such, there's no better pirate for this spot. Alright, and that's the list. Are there any cards you think we may have missed, or have any ideas for future videos similar to this one? If so, please let us know down in the comments below.